It has been a very long wait, but it has finally arrived, just when everyone had given up hope. Waypoints was everyone's favorite feature for video in the Mavic 3 and Phantom 4 series. Surprisingly, it was not so far included in any of the current models, even though for hyperlapse several models have a Waypoints mode. After yet another firmware update, DJI Fly App 1.9.0 now includes the very powerful magic Waypoint 3.0, for the moment only available with the Mavic 3 and 3 Classic. Waypoint is an intelligent flight mode that works by creating missions based on a path made by several points. For each point, the position of the aircraft, the elevation, the orientation of the camera, and the speed are stored in memory. When a mission is launched, Waypoint handles the smooth transition between points. It is the ideal tool for repetitive tasks like survey, agriculture, building sites, and so on, but it is also the most powerful one in videography to achieve all sorts of cinematic moves. There are two different ways to create a Waypoint mission. The first one is much simpler, faster, and more precise, the one to use for videography. The second one uses maps and can be useful for repetitive tasks. I will analyze it later on in this video. With the first method, after hitting the new Waypoints icon above the Return to Home button, a window appears in the lower part of the screen with two options, Waypoint and Point of Interest. Let's start with Waypoint. I fly to where I want my mission to start, to the right of this village, framing this whole house as the focal point. I intend to save the mission to be used at different times of the day. At sunset the sun will be right behind the village, so I prefer to start from a high altitude of just above 100 meters to position the gimbal slightly down and keep the sky out of the frame to avoid overexposure. After framing, I set the first point by simply hitting the C1 button on the back of the remote controller. To help frame and check the altitude, I prefer to close the window temporarily. For the second point, I move closer to the village at the same altitude and tilt the gimbal down slightly to maintain the same focal point, facing the whole house and the center of the village. To set the point, I press again the C1 button. For the third point, I move to the left, lower the altitude to just above 50 meters, and tilt the camera slightly upwards and to the right to frame majestic Mount Etna. Before framing, I increase the zoom level to 2 times. Since I will be shooting at 5.1K, the digital zoom should not lose too much resolution when encoding in 4K. Once again, I press C1, and now the 3 points forming the mission have been set. There are several parameters that can be adjusted. By tapping on the 3 dots at the right of the small window, we access the global ones that apply to all points. The global speed, which I increase slightly to about 4 meters per second. The behavior at the end of the mission, with a choice of hover, return to home, land, and back to start. I would avoid using the option land, as it can be dangerous. The drone might land in water or in someone's property. The same options in case of signal loss, and the start point, which in most cases will remain on point 1. There are also several options that apply to each individual point. We can move through the different points using the small arrows at the top of the window. The values for altitude, heading and gimbal tilt are stored when hitting the button C1, but they can be individually adjusted here for each point if needed. In camera action, we can take a photo, start recording, or stop recording. In global speed, it is possible to modify the speed for the whole mission, or by tapping on the small icon at the lower left, we can choose Custom to enter a specific speed for that point. In this case, I want the move to slow down at the end of the mission, therefore I enter a value of 1.3 meters per second for point 3. The aircraft will move at a global speed of 2.5 meters per second until point 2, and then gradually slow down between point 2 and 3. It is also possible to modify the original zoom level at each point. Notice that since at point 3 I set the zoom at 2 times, the value has been stored automatically. Pretty clever. Finally, we can have the drone hover for a specified number of seconds at that point. Then obviously there is the most powerful feature of Waypoint mode, the ability to store a mission to use it again in different conditions. By tapping on the small icon to the left of the small window, we access the history of all the missions, where we can name and save the new one. It is then possible to use the same mission at different times of the day or in different seasons, a bit like Monet's cathedrals. After hitting go, the aircraft will fly to the first point to perform the mission. Waypoints works at all resolution, including 5.1K, and with all 3 color modes. Here we can see it in action in HLG. And here in the log. Since the mission is saved, it is extremely fast and easy to reshoot the same clip in different light conditions. And if the exposure is not perfect, it only takes a couple of minutes to modify the setting and reshoot it. There are countless applications for Waypoints to perfectly produce complex cinematic moves. Let's try it with a typical movement for cinema real estate, the crane. It is a hard move to perform manually, but very simple when using Waypoints. I start on top of this house at a relatively high altitude, with the camera pointing straight down in a bird's eye view, and set the first point. Then I move backward, descending until a position in front of the house, revealing the background, and I set the second point. This is the result. By adding a third point, we can make the movement more interesting by combining the crane with another Hollywood movement, the screwdriver. We set the first point again in a top-down position, but this time after rotating the camera by 90 degrees. We then add the second point by moving away from the target, rotating the camera to the right by 45 degrees, and lowering the altitude. The third and final point remains the same as the first example. And this is the results. As you can see, the movement is not perfectly smooth, as the second point should be a bit lower, but no worries, since the mission is stored in memory, all we have to do is simply select the second point and modify the altitude. I love Waypoints. The Mavic 3 had a difficult childhood, as when it was released, plenty of functionalities were missing. But after a long series of updates, the Mavic 3 and 3 Classic are truly sensational drones, the real mothership of DJI line. If you find this video interesting, a hit of the like button would be really appreciated. The second method for Waypoints works by setting the points directly on the map. It is more time consuming and not as precise, since the points are computed based on the GPS, so some slight positioning errors are possible. For safety, it is preferable to know the surroundings and eventual hazards, although the omnidirectional obstacle sensors of the Mavic 3 are very reliable. The advantage is that mission can be created from home while sipping an exotic drink, maybe on a rainy day when it's not possible to be on the field. This is how it works. Tap on the map at the bottom left corner to have a full screen view and zoom into the desired location. There are two options, waypoints and point of interest. Let's start by setting some waypoints, by simply tapping on the desired location on the map. Each point is represented on the map and on the lower part of the window. By tapping on the three dots on the right, we access the same window we saw earlier for the setting of the entire mission. We'll return to the main window through the arrow on the left. Here we can adjust the value for each individual point. By tapping on the icon of the first point, we access the relative window with the same option as with the previous method, but this time most of them have not been automatically entered when flying. We have to do it manually, and this is more time consuming. On the first waypoint, we set the camera action to start recording, then we manually specify the altitude for that point. In follow course, we specify the direction of the camera, and this is quite fiddly. As we will see later, it can help to add a point of interest. By tapping on the small arrow next to follow course on the lower left, we choose custom to enter a value only for this point, and then with the slider we set the orientation of the camera, which is shown by the small arrow on the point in the map. The next choice is the gimbal tilt, and this is very tricky, especially if we have modified the elevation, since we cannot see the framing on the screen. It will take some trial and error. Finally, we can enter a specific amount of manual zoom for that point. Going back to the main window, we can delete a point by selecting it and then tapping on the dustbin icon to the left. We can also insert a point of interest, or more than one, generally a landmark, so that at all points or at some of them, the camera will automatically be set in that direction. We insert the point of interest by simply tapping on their position on the map. For each of them, it is possible to specify the altitude, useful in case of a tall building, a mountain, or a tree. It is then possible to have all the waypoints or some of them facing a point of interest, in which case the altitude, camera orientation and gimbal tilt will be automatically entered, making the process of setting up the point easier. But on 99% of occasions, I suggest using the first method, setting the point on the field by flying and pressing C1 on the controller. So, a sensational tool is back. I'm sure a lot of users will ask if we will have it on the Mavic Air 2S and the Mini 3 Pro. The answer is, I don't know, but I have the feeling that DJI will only offer it in the flagship model for marketing reasons. Click on this link to watch some of my in-depth analysis of different aspects of the Mavic 3. And don't forget to hit the like button if you found this video interesting. Thank you.